Much for sticking around. My name is Donna Providente. I am the Vice Chair of the Rye Sustainability Committee. This is James Ward. He is the Chairman of the committee. Thank you for being here today. The committee works with the City of Rye to work on sustainable initiatives. And most importantly, we work with the community, and we're so excited to be here at the Jay Heritage Center. Suzanne is always such an amazing partner. Where is Suzanne? Can we thank her for, I think she's running around. Always doing something. I think she's trying to get Doug back in here. So Doug's talk was amazing to learn about his initiatives. Suzanne, we were just thanking you. So there she is. So we have an all-star panel today that we are going to introduce in a minute. And we thank you all for taking your time out today to be here. And it's going to be so great because we're going to learn about what we're doing right here in our own community. So thank you. And now, James, let's get going.
Thank you, Donna. Again, it's a pleasure to be here. You know, one way to think about it is listening to Doug, it's just an amazing talk. He said a few things that resonated with me. And three of them was, what goes on in Vegas stays in Vegas, but that's not true with your lawn. The other one is saying that people aren't evil by nature. And I think that has a lot to do with, your neighbors have lawns. I have a lawn. We try to change it, but having those conversations and nudging people to the side. But also, things need to change, and we need to be a part of it. So, in December of last year, Tracy Stora, who we'll introduce, we were at a party together, and Tracy said, James, I quit my job this week. And I said, really, you don't have a job? And she says, no. And I said, would you like to do some healthy yard work? Because it's a major initiative by the Sustainability Committee, but we don't really have a force, and we need to reinvigorate it. And wouldn't you like to just take on something that you don't actually get paid for rather than, immediately? And Tracy kindly agreed. And today, this panel, this is kind of a reinvigoration of the Rye Healthy Yards initiative, which is just a really important community thing that we do. And we're being joined today by Elizabeth Poirier. Did I get it correct? Thank you. From the Largemont Mamaroneck Pollinator Pathway, correct? And so we're going to turn it over to them. I know you've been here for a long time. This is going to be interesting. This is where the rubber meets the road in terms of getting things done. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Elizabeth. Thank you very much.
Hi, everybody. So I'm Elizabeth, the founder and co-leader of the Pollinator Pathway, the Larchmont Mamaroneck branch of the Pollinator Pathway Northeast. And we are trying to do a little bit of all of those things that Doug was talking about, working with residents and municipalities to promote planting of native plants, shrubs, and trees. So without further ado, can you hear me better now? Okay. I will introduce our first panel speaker, and each panelist is going to speak for 10 minutes. Come forward, Kim. Kim Eierman is the founder of EcoBeneficial LLC. She is ecological landscape designer and environmental horticulturalist, specializing in native plants. Based here in New York, Kim teaches at the New York Botanical Garden, the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, the Native Plant Center, and the Massachusetts Horticultural Society.
Thanks so much, guys. And I wrote a book called The Pollinator Victory Garden that's out there. And we're going to be talking about native trees for challenged pollinators, because I thought this was a native tree symposium, so we're going to be on topic for this part. We're going to go fast. So if you've missed anything, send me an email. I'll send you a handout of what I'm talking about today. So I love working in this area. I've got a number of clients in Rye. One of them is the City of Rye. And if you haven't been to the Parks and Rec Center on Midland Avenue, over 2 years we've been doing a lot of installation of native plants. And I love it when I'm on site and I'm working and people say, wow, this is such a pleasure to see. The school that's across the street, they come over now and spend time in the garden because there's life in the landscape and they see all the beautiful things. The crew that works for the DPW that's been doing the install, They're amazed when they see caterpillars on the plants. They're asking me, what are these things? What are, you know? And they're seeing butterflies and bees and so on. We can all do this. So I hope I'll give you some ideas today for perhaps using some native trees for your landscape or landscapes that you're working on to help our challenged pollinators. So we don't have a remote, so here's Tracy. Tracy, next. That's the book. Next. And what are our best practices when we're choosing trees? Full disclosure, I live in Bronxville on less than 1/5 of an acre. Guess how many trees I put in? 11. 11. Okay, they're not all huge oaks, but we can all do this. So we want to use plants that are native to the ecoregion that we're in. We want to put the right native tree in the right place. I see this screwed up all the time. Best success, right plant, right place. And we want to choose material that's going to be size appropriate at maturity. You want to walk out the front door. You don't want to walk into a tree. You don't want trees to be obscuring your windows when you're looking out. Next. Go ahead, Tracy. So straight species, that's the name of the game for me. I try to use as many straight species as they occur in nature as possible. And that gives us the best genetic diversity and the full ecological function. Don't assume that a cultivar is always an equivalent of a straight species plant. We want to, go back, back, the other way, back. Local ecotypes, if we can find them. This is not so easy to find, but it's doable. Locally grown, organically grown. There is no organic certification for plants, unlike produce and meat. But you can ask the question, can't you? And we certainly want to keep any material that we buy free of neonics. Ask that question, are these treated with neonics? If the answer is yes, next. We're not going there. Go ahead. So this is a really cool poster from the Pollinator Partnership on native trees for pollinators. You can download. Next. And I'm just going to go through a few. Here's red maple. Anybody have a red maple? Great. Next. So this is what happens. Early bloom for not only some of our tough native bees like bumblebees that can go out in cooler conditions and rainier conditions, but also honeybees too, flowers for them. Now, red maples are what we call polygamodioecious. There are plants that have mostly male flowers and a few female flowers, and then the opposite, right? So we're going to be getting the pollen on the male flowers. We're going to be getting nectar and pollen on both sexes. Next. Here's the range. If you've not looked at the biota of North America to figure out native range of plants, this is a really helpful tool. But we're in New York, most of us, I think. So use the New York Flora Atlas as well. This is a very helpful way to figure out, is this really native? Next. So, not going to go into all this. These are pretty big trees, but that early bloom in spring, that early nectar and pollen source, and of course, like every tree that we're going to be talking about, it's a larval host plant. In this case, we can think about the Cecropia moth, rosy maple moth. I think we saw one of that on Doug's slides, and so on. Next. How about service berries? Anybody have amelanchiers? What charming, they're in bloom now. I left my house and there are my amelanchiers in bloom. Next, smaller trees, blooms in April, fruit in June. Next. And there's the fruit edible to us and to wildlife. The first time I ever saw a cedar waxwing in my landscape was when I planted service berries. I'd never seen a cedar waxwing before. How did they possibly find these? I can't tell you. Next. And there's the range of that. Go ahead, one of the many service berries. Very flexible, light shade to full sun, self-fruitful, but with a lot of our native plants, especially woody plants, we will get more fruit if we plant a genetically different plant in close proximity, what I call pollination partners. So you get plenty of fruit on one, you'll get even more fruit on two genetically different plants. Another one, larval host again. Next. Pawpaw. Who's got pawpaw? I had a student once who said, I put this in an orchard in one of my rows, and what a mess it was. It's a clonal tree. It spreads. Expect that. It's going to create kind of a colony of trees, not just one single trunk. Next. Has this really cool flower. Pretty good indication this is going to be a fly and or beetle pollinated plant. Next. And there you get the fruit. That is not ripe. Next. That is ripe. Very yummy. There are festivals in Ohio dedicated to this fruit. Next. And there is its range, so native here. Next. Trick with this plant is, in nature, it lives in the understory under the embrace of other trees. Here, a lot of people grow them in full sun to get more fruit production. That's up to you. But these need cross-pollination. They are not self-fruitful. You got to get two genetically different plants of the same species in close proximity. Fruit matures in September, kind of October, and it is our largest native fruit in North America. Another larval host. Go ahead. How about redbud? This is a nearby native that I'm including because you're going to see this for sale, but it has, a lot of value. Next. Yes, looks recognizable, right? Next, and you're going to see this.
Redbud flowers are edible.
There you go, and you can eat them too. Yeah. Thank you for that. That's fascinating. I'll try this spring. Next. And so this is a plant in the legume family. Next, you're going to see these wonderful pods. It's a nitrogen-fixing plant, improving the soil around it by capturing nitrogen from the air. Next. And there is its range, so it's pretty darn close. If I'm going to use a nearby native, it's got to be pretty darn nearby and no invasive tendencies. If you see plants that are naturalizing that are not native, don't use them. Pull them out. Next. So, smaller tree, again, one of these edge of the woods kind of trees, and early nectar and pollen source, and another larval host. Next. Pagoda dogwood, who knows this one? You can see why it's named this, one of my favorite plants. I say that about everything. Next. Beautiful flowers, very different from flowering dogwood. Next. And look at that, isn't that gorgeous? Next. And then we get fruit for birds. So much ecological value in these trees. Next. There's that range for Cornus alternifolia. A little hard to come by, I must say. Next. Part sun to part shade, does really like moist, acidic soil, as do most dogwoods. Lots of pollinators that go there, and at least 30 species of birds are going to eat that fruit. And another larval host. Next. Cornus florida, you know this, right? I mean, you know this one. This is pretty commonplace. Next. And those beautiful bracts are another source for pollinators. Next. Followed by this very nutritious fruit for migrating birds, and that's something to consider. When are your native plants fruiting, and for whom? Because, we've got the early fruiters, mid-season fruiters, and then late-season fruiters like these for migrating birds. Next. There's its range, quite extensive. Next. And another one, moist, slightly acidic soil, does really appreciate kind of a part shade condition. A lot of people pull these out in sun without the moisture, and they don't do well. Next, please, another larval host. A nearby native that a lot of you will find at nurseries is Crataegus viridis, green hawthorn. It's a very good ecological plant. Next. There's fruit for birds. Next, beyond the flowers for pollinators. That's its range, so it's not quite to New York, but pretty close. Next. And full sun is best. The native plant has thorns, and that actually is really good cover for birds. There are some thornless cultivars like winter cane that have a few thorns. Larval host for some hair-streaked butterflies. And our New York native, which is Crataegus cruz-galli, is hard to find, but if you can find that one, go for that one. That's native. Next. Diospyros virginiana. Anybody know this? Native persimmon. What a great tree. So disease-resistant. Deer don't like it. Next. Really incredible structure. Next. Beautiful checkerboard-like bark. Next. And we have both female blooms. Next. And male blooms, because this is a dioecious plant. There are male and female plants. You got to plant both. Next, to get this fruit, don't eat it when it looks like that. It's highly tannic. You got to wait till it's mushy. Next. And so, again, you're only going to get fruit if you have males and females, and only fruit on the female plant, as is the case with dioecious species. This is one of the host plants, the Luna moth. And Doug mentioned moths. Do you know that we have 11,000 to 12,000 species of moths in North America? But only 750 species of butterflies. Moths, show moths some love. They need our help. Next. American holly, great understory tree. Next, fully evergreen. That's persistent fruit for migrating birds. For migrating birds when they come back from migration, but overwintering birds, this is essential fruit for them. This kind of persistent fruit that is not nutritious, it's not very tasty, but it's food of desperation in the winter when there's not a lot to eat. Next. There's the range of that plant. Go ahead. Next. And, you'll typically see these in nature in the understory. I had a trip to Maryland to do a talk last year, and I couldn't believe how many American hollies I saw. Some deer resistance, depends where you are. These are another dioecious species. You got to get the male and the female, and there are some named cultivars. Next. Liriodendron tulipifera, tulip tree, beautiful, fast-growing tree related to magnolias. Next. That's what the flower looks like. Have you ever noticed pollinators in it? Next. Range of that tree. Next. And these get really, really big, so you need some space for this. Larval host for the eastern tiger swallowtail, amongst others. Next, getting there. Magnolia virginiana, sweet bay magnolia, fully evergreen, beautiful plant. Next. This kind of flower arrangement is a very ancient form of flower because it's a very ancient form of tree that evolved with very ancient form of pollinator, primarily beetle pollinated. Next. There's the range of sweet bay. Next. Sun to part sun. Again, that moist soil is key. Acidic soil is where it wants to be. Primarily pollinated by beetles, but you'll see some bees and some other pollinators on it too. Larval host for several species of moths and butterflies. Next. Nyssa sylvatica, Tupelo. Anybody ever gone to the southeast and gotten Tupelo honey? Next. It doesn't look like much, the flowers, but bees love them. Next. Very large native range. Next. And sun to light shade, moist to wet soil. Pay attention to soil moisture conditions for best planting. And larval host plant again. Next. Prunus americana. All of our prunus are going to be excellent host plants, excellent pollinator plants. Here's just one pruned up. I never do this. I'm leaving them kind of wild and scraggly in my practice. Go ahead. And in the rose family, when you see that kind of petal, you know you're in the rose family. Next. Fruit, edible to you and wildlife. Next. And really, really extensive native range. Next. Getting there. So light shade to full sun, it needs cross-pollination. All of our prunus have limited self-fertility. Get a companion plant in again. Next. Chokecherry, kind of a small version of Prunus serratina, the black cherry. Next. In a smaller package, beloved by pollinators. Next. Birds just eat this fruit up. Next. And really, really big native range. Next. Cross-pollination again, guys. Larval host plant, you got the picture. All sorts of things going on here. Next. All of our willows, Doug's, number 2 species? Salix, right? Willows. Well, here's black willows, a pretty big tree. Next. But all the willows are great. They have an interesting pollination strategy. They are sometimes pollinated by insects and sometimes wind pollinated. It's a combination strategy for a backup device. Go ahead. Really big native range. Next. And these are big trees. They can get up to 60 feet tall. They're not your average, backyard willow. Dioecious plants, males and females. This time of year, I'm starting to go to nurseries with a hand lens and figuring out which are the males and which are the females, because nobody's labeling them. It's terrible. We need to really ask for more help when we're buying native plants by seeing things that are labeled. Another dioecious plant, males and females, and another host plant. Next. Tilia americana, nobody plants this. Anybody have a Tilia? American linden? Do you? That's fabulous. So we've forgotten so many of our native trees. Next. And they're the blooms, beloved by bees. Next. Big native range. Next. And not small, up to 60 feet tall. You're going to see bees, flies, moths, and so on, and larval hosts for many moth species. Next. So in conclusion, this is really speedy little presentation. In conclusion, next, your best practices for choosing native trees. Choose trees that are native to your ecoregion. Use the right tree in the right place. That's for any plant, let's face it. Plant straight species trees if you can find straight species for best genetic diversity. And when possible, buy local ecotypes that are locally grown and always pesticide-free if you can find them. Thank you. Next. That's my contact info. Send me a note if you want to have a copy of this. And next, and happy to sell you a copy of the book. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you very much, Kim. That was fantastic. Our next panelist is Philippine Hoagland. Philippine is co-founder of Healthy Yards Westchester. She was born in the Netherlands to a family of bulb formers and avid gardeners. When concerns were raised in the 1970s about harmful chemicals used in the bulb industry, Philippine remembers vividly the transition of their delight in flowers to concern and fear. In response to these problems, her uncle spearheaded the WAVE movement. Since she has arrived in the US, Philippine has worked to raise awareness of the harmful practices of conventional landscaping and to promote more sustainable alternatives.
Hello, everyone. Whoop. So obviously that's me, and I consider my garden as the most favorite room of my house, and I'm always surprised that so little of the Americans do. Wait, let me turn this around. So all the essentials of what makes the planet an interesting and beautiful place and healthy for us are actually visible in our gardens. Now, in the Netherlands where I'm from, if you need help with your yard, can I give the next picture? Getting you a clicker. Yeah. Okay, that's fine. Did I do something wrong? You did not do anything wrong. It was me. I've never done a clicker, but I will try. Up and down. Okay, so I go up for further. Eh? Okay. Yeah. It doesn't work. Oh, here, yes, yes. Okay, so in the Netherlands, if you need help with your yard, this is what you get. So people that are helping you with your yard in the Netherlands are generally people that have studied horticulture, and they come with a van and they work with their hands. Generally, there's no machinery included. So when I came to the United States and I was wondering, who can help me with this gorgeous big yard that I have? I was looking around and I found names like True Green and Save a Tree and Green Design, and I thought, okay, that's what I need. So that's what I got. And, oh, this is another one. No, I can keep this one. So if you ask them to help you, they cannot come for an occasional visit. You have to sign up for a service. And what is that service? Oh, wait. So we have to understand that in Westchester alone, we have 1,500, if not more, companies that look like this. They have at least 2 or 3 trucks, and they set out every morning. Every truck has generally 3 people sitting in them. That's 1 employee that's been paid and is on the books, and the rest are generally day laborers. They don't speak English, they're not insured, and they earn very little money with a pretty dirty job. Yeah, doing what? That we see now. So this is what you get if you sign up for a service contract. And really, everything it does is a hazard to the environment. Whether it's blowing, it's now estimated that small gasoline engines like these pollute actually more than all our cars do together. The pesticide load that landscaping organizations or the industry adds to our yard is a bigger load than any farmer in New York State. And then they have all these other different types of services that I think you're all familiar with. And the latest one they're adding to their service is actually outdoor lighting. So none of it really does. Yeah, that's a little, I can't see it from here. Well, you know what? I do this. So what these companies are doing actually is turning that room that is my very favorite room into the most polluting and hazardous place of the house. And that's actually true for a lot of households in America. They don't know just how much nastiness is going on in their garden. Luckily, we're not alone. we have each other here, and the awareness of the importance, especially also with people like Dr. Talamy, is growing fast. And what we're seeing is that there are really, really a lot of native plants available nowadays. People are aware of this problem, or getting aware, maybe not everybody, but it's really in the newspapers, it's in social media. There is, there are a lot of rumors that this has to change. But it's not as easy. I think a lot of people that are doing this for many years already are really, really tired. They have to maintain maybe their own yard, which is still a pleasure, but if you're involved in public pollinator gardens, school gardens, you know that it's really, really hard to find volunteers to maintain a good, healthy yard. I think there are 30 volunteers here on this area working. That requires a lot of energy and goodwill. And I think we need also to talk about the fact that, yes, of course we need to plant all those beautiful trees, but we need also find a way to remove all those cages. And we also need landscaping people to help us with this task and not to be sort of our opposite. So who is going to help us to maintain the sustainable landscaping? I heard the answer tonight, of this afternoon. It's Doc Talamy's wife. But in fact, we really don't have anybody to help us. I have this list with 1,500 landscaping companies, and on top of that, I have a couple of hundred of people just, have a truck and a mower and do this thing privately. I cannot refer a single person for just doing some weeding work for an affordable price. They're not there. So we have a huge amount of people working in the landscaping. We have a huge amount of people who want to really do a good thing, and we have very, very little help and very, very little ways to get this becoming the success that we all want it to be and that we need it to be, because as we just learned how important that is. Actually, this is, I put this there because it's one of the most successful things, that if you already have somebody working for you, whether it's in your house or you have maybe a landscaping company, and you're not happy with the lens company, but you can pull one of the guys out and ask him to come, separately, that seems to be sort of a successful way to get some help. Okay, so the reasons, or actually the fact that we found so little help and also so little information about how to tackle this, how to really create a sustainable yard. That's why we set up, me and my friend Fiona, 2 organizations. We started with Leave Leaves Alone because Fiona was then already working with towns or town governments on leaf blower legislation, and at the same time she was educating landscapers on the practice of leaf mulching. So that was actually our entry into the landscaping industry, because we already had a lot of contacts with those landscapers. So that was our first organization, and the second one is Healthy Yards. And both of these websites answered a lot of questions, and it's also in Spanish, and it is for homeowners and for professionals, because I really, really believe that there is not one expert. We really have to learn all this stuff together the way we go. Especially with the climate change, with the invasives, we're learning new things all the time, and we really have to keep each other informed. So I'm gonna read this, sorry. So one of the really successful organizations recently here is the Pollinator Pathway. And in Westchester, we have about, I think more than 30 towns now have signed up and have some sort of organization that works in their own way on a Pollinator Pathway project. Everybody can do it in their own way. Some towns call it their Healthy Yards project. Some call it the Pollinator Pathway. Some have incorporated it in a an advisory organ from the government. Sometimes a garden committee or garden, club takes it on. So there's a lot of different people taking on this same subject. And our goal, Fiona and mine, and with those organizations, is really to connect all these dots, to make sure that we all help each other, that when somebody fails, that maybe in another town it was more successful, and so we can share that type of information. Yes, so thank you for being part of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Philippine. That was very inspiring. Okay, now we're going to hear from Jeff Cordillac, a Connecticut native whose career has focused on wildlife conservation, watershed protection, organic growing, and other sustainability practices. Jeff owns Organic Ways and Means LLC, one of the first all-electric and 100% organic landscaping companies in the Northeast. Since 2019, OWM has converted hundreds of acres to zero-emission mowing and pollinator-friendly yard care.
It's so nice to be here. I run an electric landscaping company. I only have battery-powered blowers, mowers, and trimmers. Other than that, I'm just an all-around environmentalist, and I'll talk to you about a few hopeful topics. This company, Organic Ways and Means, is a small company. We have 2 crews, and we certainly can't do everybody's hydrangeas. But one of my goals is to get out there and show other landscapers how our crew works, how the machines work, and then I show up at any town meeting where there's landscapers saying it can't be done to ban gas blowers. So that's my job. That's me. And I'm glad to be doing this work, that's for sure. Today I'll just mention briefly organics, microbes, and electrics. So what we do really makes a huge difference. So I want to encourage you, keep doing it. Here's an example. There's a vineyard on this side, and then there's this vineyard, okay? This is not following all the best practices, and it ends up in a nutrient decline, in a quality decline. This is showing the quality of nutrients over time in apples. This is a much better model, and all of the nutrients and the diversity comes from many plants planted among. That's just one vineyard choice, one manager choice. So you guys planting your native plants is going to make all the difference. We can think about all these cycles that we're using. Many people think we've got to plant, go get nutrient, bring nutrient to plant, and then watch grow. But really, we just have to plant the plant and watch it grow if we do it right, if we let the nutrients cycle, you know? There's all sorts of cycling. The carbon cycle is very important. Carbon is critical in your soils. I encourage you to stop flipping your soils over unless it's really, 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 really needed, because the carbon gets eaten by microbes that like oxygen. So you can plant into the ground. I'll show you what I mean. This is just about the carbon cycle, and that the ground needs carbon. When carbon is fixed, this is the after. That's the before. That's somebody making a choice for management. This is Africa. If you've been there, it feels a lot like this. Alan Savory discovered a new way to manage the animals. Instead of reducing elephants by shooting them, he decided to just keep them out of an area for most of the year and then let them back at certain times and then keep them moving, just like the old African animals. And that is a river now that they did that at. You can do this. This makes a difference. Alan Savory is saving Africa this way. Farmers are no-tilling. That means don't flip your soil. Get rid of the plow. If you no-till, you'll have benefits. You'll have less problems, less pollutants, better sediment, better resistance. All of these things come from my experience with farming. I took these pictures in Connecticut. This is a roller crimper. We don't go out and plow. We roller crimp. Then it looks like this. Then the same day, a guy comes along, dropping plants into that after the ground is sliced open. And then you have rows of planted plants that grow within this crimped grass, which is dying. That's using a cover crop and a roller crimper. And then we have pumpkins. This is a Connecticut pumpkin. right, in a roller crimped field. We can do that in our little gardens, okay? Bare soil is not the goal. Anything on it, leaves, cardboard, but in general, I take vegetable gardens, chop straw. Not hay, but straw. And no matter what, just cover the soil and it will do better overall. That's my lesson. Because it's all in the soil food web. All of this life is there. Maybe you've seen diagrams about how diverse it is, and there's things in there, nematodes, mycorrhizae, arthropods, bacteria, they all have a job. They all do different things. You could study for days about this. You've got all sorts of life on a leaf, in the soil, a water bear, tiny little water bears. Bacteria are like biochemists. They do all sorts of things. They create hormones and they protect the plants from disease and promote plant growth. I mean, who knew a bacteria was making these things, these compounds? Protozoas doing all sorts of stuff. Look up what they do. Bacteria, protozoa, fungi. They're transport engineers. When you're fungi, most people think of fungi like this, but you know, that's really what it's like in the microscopic world. This is one of the most alive parts of the soil environment, right next to the root. You know, you can have all sorts of carbon coming out of a plant, because what they didn't teach us is that the plants are feeding the soil. We don't need to go buy nutrient, bring the plant. We just got to let the plants keep living well. Then they're going to exude their sugars into the environment with an enzyme, and they'll get back the right nutrients. Okay, so there's a symbiosis. That's how it's working. That's what they didn't teach us. That's what I discovered as a very mature adult, right? Not like even 10 years ago, right? So all of this is just from photosynthesis. They didn't tell us that the plants are feeding sugars down into the ground. That's putting carbon in the ground. And guess what? That amount of carbon could actually reverse climate change. That roller crimping method of farming, if employed worldwide, would store enough carbon back in the ground. We wouldn't have the atmospheric carbon levels because we'd be farming it back in the ground, carbon farming. You could just count on microbes to take care of you. And if you start using pesticides, you're going to hurt the microbes in the soil. So no fungicides are really good, things like that. So that brings me to lawns with my last 2 minutes. They're everywhere. I'm taking care of lots of them. I'm encouraging people to reduce the size, plant native plants, but it all has to be organic, because then we don't have to do all of these inputs and all of these crazy methods. To have an organic landscape, you don't need to buy a bunch of organic stuff. You need to start acting organically, you know? So I can go and take care of a whole estate with like 25 acres of forests and lawns and gardens, all organically with electric machines. Why can I do that? Because I bought the equipment and I went and did it. It's all I did. And I was like, well, I'm going to try this for 1 or 2 years, and if this fails miserably, I'll just slink away. But it's working fine. I can take care of lawns, no problem. I've innovated some ways. I bought, you know, at Home Depot, they have a good old-fashioned lawn sweeper. Who has them? Nobody. But I buy them, and then I use them to pick up the nuts and the cones while I'm mowing. So I'll just mow sticks and leaves and mulch mow and if that customer is kind of, you know, needing, you know, a photo shoot's coming up, you know, I can clean it right up. I can clean it right up. So I use electrics and I use compost. So if you want to get your soil back going every spring, throw compost on top and leave it on top and plant into it. Please don't bother mixing it in, because the creatures that live on the surface don't like to be flipped. Right? I can use compost to go from this lawn to this lawn. No problem. It's just literally compost and seed and straw on top. That's all. I don't know why there's a bunch of blank slides, but imagine gorgeous landscapes. And I use electric blowers in full leaf season. So every time you hear a landscaper saying, well, the summer ban's too much, or, oh, God forbid you make it a year-round ban, I promise you it works. It works just fine, and it's less expensive. The amount of gas that they're using in the fall, I talked to a landscaper who converted to electric. He's like, let me get back to you and look. He said, yep, 20 to 25 gallons of gas a day on a truck with 4 blowers and a big push blower. So 25 gallons times 350 a day, that's expensive. You know, we also do other things. We pull out invasives and stuff like that. But the compost and feeding the microbes is what you want to do. It's really important. So that's just what this is about. You could see the power of compost, a fancy lawn next to a pool. I can't believe they put up with that. They brought me in, and that was 2 months later. So I think 6 weeks even. So, and that was with compost, because the soils are hungry for carbon. That's what's happening. So you got to feed them, and when you feed those native gardens or the lawn, that compost, or you find the right food, or maybe you have to adjust the pH if you're that far out of balance. But once you do, these things get going. In fact, I probably won't put fertilizer on all the lawns in the future. In fact, I barely use fertilizers. I'm a little busy and a little lazy to go do that. So this is just what it's all about. If you're looking for standards, this is the NOFA standards. I highly recommend them. And I don't think I have any time left, but I want to thank Philippine for all of her work with Leave Leaves Alone and all of her friends in the community. And the pollinator partnerships have been incredible. So I'm pretty sure I'm out of time, and I'd like to turn it over to our next speaker.
Thank you so much. That was excellent, Jeff. Thank you. Peter Lindroth is our next speaker, the Director of Water Quality at Save the Sound, working out of the organization's Larchmont office. Peter worked in the Education and Science departments at the Bruce Museum before joining the team at Save the Sound. He's a member of the Greenwich Inland Wetlands and Watercourses Agency, in addition to serving on the Long Island Sound Study Water Quality Monitoring Work Group.
Thank you. Thank you. And thanks for sticking around, too. That was such a great talk with Doug telling me. I'd never heard him speak before. I see all these highlights of him, and that was really phenomenal, and thank you, everyone else, for sticking around. So, yes, I'm Peter Lindroth, Director of Water Quality at Save the Sound. Really happy to be there. I grew up, just a quick thing on me, I grew up in, on, and around the Sound. Even during a short hiatus in California for my undergrad, I'd always be coming back. And I love, literally, Long Island Sound. I swim in it, fish it, do what I do. And in that, though, in my lifetime, and probably many of yours too, I unfortunately saw Long Island Sound flatline. In the late 80s, the early 90s, and I'm a Western Sound guy, I saw the Sound just die. Fish, hundreds of thousands of dead fish on the surface, lobsters trying to crawl out of the water because they couldn't breathe, and of course they're not going to be able to breathe out of the water either. And all that was linked with excess eutrophication and excess nitrogen entering the waterway. So I'll be talking a little bit, if you're interested in that, by the way, and I should mention, because I'm not all doom and gloom, I have an education background, Long Island Sound is getting statistically better, significantly better, which is great. And if you're interested in that whole story, though, there's a book, This Fine Piece of Water by Tom Anderson, that outlines really well, I think, the history of Long Island Sound, including that really awful time in the late 80s. So I'll be talking a little bit about the Long Island Sound report card that, well, I should also mention a little bit of for Save the Sound. Working at Save the Sound's a blast. I'm a trained environmental scientist, but we have about 50 plus people working around the entire Sound. So we're a bi-state organization. I work in our Larchmont office. We also have a fairly large office up in New Haven. We have environmental scientists like myself, but we also have climate specialists that are lobbying up in Hartford and Albany for climate change initiatives, and water quality specialists doing the same thing. We have ecological restoration engineers that are doing green infrastructure, dam removal, lots of great projects that benefit the Sound. We have a legal team, so we have a little bit of teeth as a nonprofit too, which is one of the things that interests me. I mean, we can only take things so far with advocacy, and every now and then we will take clean water actions in accordance with the Clean Water Act. And you name it, everything in between, but it's a real honor working with everyone at Save the Sound. But I'm in the Water Quality Program, Director of Water Quality. One of the reports we do is the Long Island Sound Report Card. How many of you have seen or read the Long Island Sound Report Card? Thank God. Every now and then I go to a room and like 1 or 2 hands goes up, especially if I'm outside of Westchester, Nassau, you know, if I go far east. I'm glad you've seen it. I'm going to talk a bit about the Long Island Sound Report Card. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's a report card for Long Island Sound. I'm going to talk about data to action, how we take the report card, how others take the report card, and other data we collect and make things happen, and local stewardship. And I am focusing on the sound, but given that this is a Healthy Yards day and discussion, I'm focusing on nitrogen, and I'll be focusing on a few harbors also in our area. But here it is. If you haven't read it, I can sign a copy before we leave. I got a couple in my bag, no problem. I'll hook you up. We've done 4 since I've been at Save the Sound. It was a very friendly handoff from the University of Maryland. They do a report card for the Chesapeake Bay, but they do report cards internationally too. Really great group, the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science. So friendly handoff to us. I've been at Save the Sound for 10 years now. So my first was 2016. We do it biennially, so every 2 years. Our last one was 2022, and we have one coming out in October. And the Long Island Sound report card focuses on environmental health. It's very specific, right? It's not like, how clean is Oakland Beach for me to go and take a swim today? It focuses mostly and fully, on ecological environmental health. So how healthy is the water for those fish that we want to see in the water, for shellfish, for lobsters, for the whole host of plants, animals that we want to see in the Sound? How healthy are the waters for that community? And it really is a mark of environmental impacts from nutrients. It truly is. The parameters that we ended up grading are marks of, well, how is Long Island Sound being harmed? How's it doing in respect to pollution coming from wastewater treatment plants? By the way, we are all lead contributors of excess nitrogen to Long Island Sound. Every time we flush our toilet, every time we're running the shower, doing the dishes, we all are the main polluters, really, when it comes to nitrogen pollution, fertilizing our yard. But some of the lead things that we do to contribute nitrogen to the Sound are flushing toilets. Of course, you got to keep flushing your toilet, don't get me wrong. But I just want to point out, often, or especially early on in my time, people that run these wastewater treatment plants aren't, criminals. They're not villains. A lot of times it's like, wow, there's people at the treatment plant. Wow, the treatment plant's doing awful. They're treating our, what, literally. They're good people. They're doing their job. But even treated sewage has a lot of nitrogen in it. A fair amount, I shouldn't say a lot, but it still has nitrogen in it, and when you think about how much of it's coming out of the wastewater treatment plants, it's a large nitrogen source. Also, stormwater, I think you're all probably pretty familiar. I'm talking to a crowd that knows water quality. Stormwater picks up all kinds of pollutants from roadways and other places, deposits it in these drains, and then guess what? It goes to rivers like Blind Brook, Beaver Swamp Brook, makes its way into Milton Harbor. That happens all around the Sound, all around the world, really. Not a lot of septic and cesspools in Westchester County, but Long Island, there's a ton. There's 400,000 cesspools or something or other in Suffolk County. That's an area we work as well. There's septic out here too, big nitrogen contributor, and then fertilizer. We heard a lot about fertilizers and lawn care and such, and I was somewhat surprised when I dug a little bit deeper into coastal Westchester how a lot of the bays and harbors in Westchester are really suffering from excess fertilizers, more so than other land practices. And I'll get to that. That was the Tale of Three Harbors in the title. But first, a little bit more on the report card. While we issue this report card, it was developed with academics. It was developed with EPA staff, Department of Environmental Conservation staff in New York, Department of Energy and Environmental Protection staff in Connecticut, DEP in New York City. I could go on and on, right? Yukon, CUNY Queens, Stony Brook. They were all in a technical advisory committee, so they weren't like staff on the project, but they all lent their expertise as to how we would grade water quality data and put forward a report. If we hadn't have done that, and we had just released this report card and said, hey, we're Save the Sound, this is what's going on in the Sound, it wouldn't get picked up and used as much as it does. Outside of just spheres, and I don't mean just in a bad way, but it wouldn't get picked up by federal senators, by state senators, and used to advocate for funds. We had to make it a collaborative process. So here it is, 2022. Sorry if we did this in November, I'd have 2024. The next one's coming out in October, the Long Island Sound report card. And one of the reasons we do a report card is because people understand it, right? Like if I were to talk to you about tens of hundreds of thousands of data points that make this report card click, you'd probably be pretty bored, honestly. If I talked to you about diel dissolved oxygen fluctuations and ammonia and orthophosphate and total nitrogen, and if I just went on and on about that, I would lose your attention pretty fast, I know, and that's okay. We all live busy lives. But with a report card, it's an A to F, it's a green to red. You can tell just by looking at this what portion of the Sound isn't doing as well, right? Is it the eastern or western portion? No, it's the west, but that's okay. It's the other east. Thank you for jumping in anyways, though. I do appreciate it. It's the other east, the west. But anyhow, when it comes down to it, green is good, red is not good in terms of water quality. And as you look at the open sound, and I'm not here to talk about the open sound today, but when you do look at it, you could see there's a gradient from green to red, right? And that really has to do mostly with population density in the open sound. How many wastewater treatment plants are pumping out that treated effluent? When you go down, I love New York City, I'm there all the time, but when you go down to New York City, you have millions and millions of toilets flushing, right? And if you go to Eastern Connecticut or the North Fork of Long Island, it's a bit different. So it's not impacting the open sound as much. It's not that people are living incredibly differently, although they might be. It's just literally not as many toilets as you go down this way. And that 1980, 1990 story that I quickly mentioned was really focused on wastewater treatment plants. And we were able to show through the report card, this is just one clip, where we have over 15 years that we've graded, we showed that statistically significant improvement. And we still advocate for more improvements in this portion of the sound, but they're very wastewater treatment plant focused. One thing that we did do, though, in the last couple versions of the report card is start issuing bay grades. Bay grades for, I didn't do that. Bay grades. Bay grades, like embayments, like harbors, like Milton Harbor, like Mamaroneck Harbor, Norwalk Harbor, Black Rock Harbor. Those are embayments. So we issued bay grades, like bays. And these are based on actual data, and this is another whole talk that I could do, but actual data collected by 27 groups around the sound as a program that we administer and then grade these data. And in these bays and harbors, it's a different story. Unless a wastewater treatment plant, like Black Rock's a good example in Bridgeport, unless they're discharging, or Stamford, a little bit closer, unless they're discharging their treated effluent in the bay, these all have a unique fingerprint in respect to the pollutants that are entering them, and a little bit of a different percentage when it comes down to it too. So I wanted to focus on 3 local harbors in Westchester, seeing that we're talking about Westchester. I should not have used green, yellow, and red. My science advisors would not have liked that. These are not grades. I just thought they were 3 colors that kind of look cool together. But I should have done different colors. But anyhow, we're going to be talking a bit about Larchmont Harbor, which is close by, Mamaroneck Harbor, right, our classic Y, and then Milton Harbor, which is like you can kind of see, right, if you go out there and take a good look. We're going to be talking about nitrogen going into these harbors, these bays. And specifically, we're going to look at the sources of nitrogen. So be it from fertilizer, wastewater treatment plant, septic, stormwater. And I'm going to be referencing, and I'd really encourage people if you're into this kind of thing, because this is where you could lose people, but you'll send these out, right, Tracy? Okay, good. To check out this study that was done by some really phenomenal academics around the sound on nitrogen loading to bays and harbors. There's over 100 of them, and they show each one where the nitrogen's coming from. Here's Larchmont Harbor, 78%. That was kind of staggering for me. 78% of the nitrogen load into Larchmont Harbor is coming from fertilizer. If you look at this pie charts are also pretty easy to understand. This big green chunk is represented as fertilizer entering Larchmont Harbor in its coastal watershed. So in this specific green area, the nitrogen load is 78% from fertilizer. And then you take a look, atmospheric deposition to watershed, that's a fancy way of saying stormwater, so that's also a pretty big chunk, and then deposition straight to the embayment. But it gets, I never looked at all 3 next to each other like this. Then you look at Mamaroneck Harbor, and it's 79% from fertilizer. And let me tell you something, this is important because I've been out on each one of these harbors and seen the impacts of nitrogen on them. I've seen fish kills in Mamaroneck Harbor. I've seen kids poking around dead fish at Harbor Island Park. It's awful, near the Marine Education Center, multiple times. And the Mamaroneck River is a huge river. It goes really far up, but the coastal inputs are significant too, and nitrogen is definitely reducing oxygen in Mamaroneck Harbor. That's the process. Excess nitrogen leads to a bunch of technical biological processes that lower oxygen in the water. Equals dead fish, basically, and other life. And then Milton Harbor, 81%. 81%. Now, you might ask yourself if the golf course that I'm looking at, maybe right across the way that direction, is a big part of that, and they might be. And they might be for all of these 3 embayments, not just that one golf course. We happen to have a lot of golf courses, and I'm not trying to make them out as the villain, but golf courses do use a lot of fertilizers to keep that turf grass looking as pretty as golfers like it to be. Golfers aren't evil people. I don't golf myself. I get that they want to recreate and play golf, but we really need to start considering where these nitrogen sources are coming from. And golf courses, I think, play a very big role. If you dig this model apart and really pick it apart, you can see the golf courses in the data. But also homeowners do too, with land practices and big turf lawns. So 81%. Look at that, I mean, it's a lot. And I didn't just pick those. I mean, I did because they're right here and we're right by Milton Harbor. But I looked at Echo Bay, I looked at East Chester Bay, I looked at the Byram River that we share, of course, with Greenwich. Similar stories, although some of them are more urbanized, so they have more coming from stormwater, like East Chester Bay, the Bronx, Mount Vernon are actually bringing a lot of stormwater in respect to fertilizer. But, it just goes to say that talks like this are important. Reducing fertilizer, Milton Harbor, I've seen Milton Harbor this color. I've been out on Milton Harbor collecting samples for DEC when it just looks like a cloud of neon green algae. Harmful algal blooms, really dangerous for us, dangerous for wildlife, not good, right? So those impacts are real and they are happening. So actions that we can take, again, I'm not doom and gloom. Reducing runoff with rain gardens, rain barrels, you're hearing about it today. We have a link, reducerunoff.org, you could check into it. I feel like many of us could do maybe a little bit more, right? And if a lot of us do a little bit, it can make a little bit more. Picking up pet waste, this is a classic. I think Long Island Sound Study is going to redo this, but pick up pet waste. Don't let the pet waste go down into the gutters, into the drain, out on the beach if you're walking your dog at Playland Park in the winter, pick it up. Pet waste can be a pretty big source. These rain gardens are great. Encourage your local Department of Public Works to do more rain gardens, more stormwater capture. And then in respect to fertilizer, because I was just showing all of them, right? Over 75% of the nitrogen entering those waterways is from fertilizer. Do the right thing. We issued something in 2019, very due for an update, I would say. 2019 was a while ago. And we're looking forward to working with Tracy and the rest of the sustainability committees on updating some of this stuff. But it's still relevant. If you go to our Healthy Yards campaign, that link, you can see we have letters that you can give your landscaper in English and Spanish, both versions. You could pass it right over to them, have them sign it, give it back to you. It basically says, I want you to use organic fertilizer. I want you to let me know when you're going to put the fertilizer out, please, because you're going to get a check every time, or a bill. You have to cut the check every time they do it. So it goes into, I want you to mulch the grass. I want you to leave the grass clippings on the grass. I want you to, this is what I want you to do with my leaves. It's got a very prescriptive list. And once you give it to the landscaper, it's your property. They need to do it. Or you might need to find a new landscaper. I put this out because I think it's a great story, although it's relevant to Long Island in a way. Scott's Turf Builder, Long Island. Scott's came together and worked with Citizens Campaign for the Environment and other groups and developed a fertilizer that's good for turf. Turf grass isn't great, but I get people want it. I want it. I have a 3-year-old at home. I like to have a little bit of yard. If you're going to have it, use a fertilizer that's better for the environment. This particular formula is great for Long Island soils, which are really sandy, but also very protective of the waters. It's organic fertilizer. It's slow release. It's a better fertilizer to use. Jeff's got really cool electric fleet. I don't have an electric fleet of stuff to take care of my house yet, but every now and then you'll see me pushing this thing around. It's good to leave your grass clippings on your lawn, right? Leave them on the lawn. It's a natural source of fertilizer. It's also good, and I love this because I don't have to cut the grass as much, to leave your grass just a little bit longer. It likes to be a little bit longer. It's better with water when it's a bit longer. You're not doing as much carbon input as you heard if you just leave it a little bit longer. Then when your wife or husband or a significant other tells you to cut the lawn, you can say, sorry, babe, gotta let it be a little bit longer. Not yet, next week. And if you are, if you do have, and this would be a hard thing to cut grass in a big property like this, but, take the time to plant native. You heard that all day. I don't need to go there. I'm not a biologist, but plant native, right? It's better with water. It's better with nutrients. It's better for the environment. It's better for the micro community. It's better for all the cool moths that Doug showed. For the whole environment, honestly. If you're near a water body, try to get a 20 to 30 foot buffer between your grass and that waterway with native deep root plants that help protect the water body just by doing what they do. Don't let grass go right up to a water body. That's a really bad way to just have that water body become polluted with nutrients. Last but not least, and I mean that, get involved in public meetings. You're all here today, but go to your municipal public meetings too. Get involved with an environmental advocacy organization. My development department would hate me if I said, not Save the Sound. So please consider joining Save the Sound. But if Long Island Sound water quality isn't necessarily your cup of tea, consider joining any one of the many environmental organizations that are fighting for a cleaner environment, be it the sound or lands. It's all connected. Consider joining. Also, you're helping amplify their voice. Petitions come through, public meetings come through often, and people are living busy lives. They don't see all of this happening. But something could be happening in New York City that's relevant to the whole western portion of the Sound, and you might be living in, Eastchester, and you might not hear about it, but you still have an input and a voice in those things. So if you sign up to an environmental org, that's what we do, 9 to 5. I wish we only worked 9 to 5. But that's what we do, and you can, we'll help curate and get information to you. And with that, I want to say thank you. I think we're sticking around, and we have one more speaker. So thank you very much.
Okay, great. Our last speaker is Mark Magel, an experienced landscape designer. He created the Butterfly Garden at the Rockefeller University and the Bird and Butterfly Garden at the Bedford Audubon Society. Peter also oversees the native gardens at the Prine Sanctuary for the Sawmill River Audubon, where he is also a board member. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you all, and I apologize. I don't have slides to show. It's the last speaker of the day. If you can stay awake through the end of my 10 minutes or so, that's great. I'm more of a gardener or horticulturalist, and and also speak more often about deer. I don't speak all that often about birds, but that's what I'm here to talk about today. I'm Mr. Birdman. Birds are the most valuable and visible wildlife, or most visible wildlife on the planet. Birds are excellent bioindicators of habitat health and quality, and they're largely diurnal. They fly around during the day, so we see them. And they make sounds, so we hear them. So that's why we notice them. And one thing that my wife and I noticed not that long ago, we live right next to one of the sanctuaries, is the morning chorus. As a gardener, I would get up at about 4:15 in the morning or so, and the birds would would start about 4:20, and it became deafening, the sound, and they all say, hey, it's morning, good morning, and then they die down, and then they have their day, and that's the way they would do. But about 4 or 5 years ago, we realized, where's the morning chorus? We just don't hear it. We hear birds, but it's just like normal daylight. What's going on? In the last 50 years, North America has witnessed the bird population decline by about 2.9 billion birds, or about 39% of the bird population in North America is gone. And it didn't actually happen across all environments, and it didn't happen across all species. So in some ways, that's an encouraging sign. About 15%, or about 90% of the losses have come from just 12 families, including sparrows and finches and blackbirds, and warblers, and about 15% of them is really the decline in two populations, the European house sparrow and the European starling, which are both invasives, nasty invasives. I like birds. I like them all. I think they're all kind of cute, but real birders, boy, they hate European house sparrows for some reason. I don't know why. But the decline in the bird population hasn't been bad in all ways. But there are multiple factors why the birds are dying. And we want to say, okay, we're not planting enough natives, we're spraying too much pesticide and all that, and we'll fix that, and we got the problem solved. No, the biggest problem is cats, domestic cats and feral cats. Of that 2.9 billion, approximately 2.4 billion is because of cats, just killing birds. And that's one that, what's the solution? Well, put a bell on your cat or keep it indoors. Problem solved. And you've really increased the bird population just by doing that. Another is deer. The rise in the deer population down here, not so bad. South of 287, not bad. But north of 287, terrible. There's an ongoing study that's been going on for decades now, several decades in Pennsylvania by a guy, Dr. David Colesta, who was looking at the effect of deer population on songbird species, on native tree sapling height, and on native wildflowers. And a normal, healthy, biologically sustainable deer population is somewhere around 8 to 12 deer per square mile. If you're feeding them roses and other things out of your yard, you could argue, okay, 15 per square mile is okay. They found that when you get to 17, you start to see some degradation in the environment. When you get to 22 per square mile, you see the complete elimination of certain songbird species, sapling height goes down, certain wildflowers are eliminated as well. That's at 22 deer per square mile. Where I live, northern Westchester, it's about 65 or 70 per square mile. It is off the chart. So deer, yeah, that's a big one. But what are the deer doing? And I wouldn't say that they're not eating the birds, because they're eating the birds too. They're eating some smaller mammals, and they'll even, well, they'll eat a lot of things that you don't even want to know. But what they're doing is they're eating the plants. And that is creating a zero understory. There was a study about 15 years ago or so here in Westchester where they found that where there was a significant deer population, there was zero regeneration of growth of the forests. Zero. They were eating everything. And they also found not only if you would exclude them, build fences and allow things to grow back, they'd eaten the seeds as well. So there was no regeneration without intervention of reseeding. So what they're doing is they're destroying the habitat. They're destroying where the birds are sitting, where the birds are nesting. And they're also destroying the sources of food that the birds are eating as well. So it's those alone are really the biggest problems with the deer right now. Collisions are another, well, that would be the second largest factor which is causing the deer decline. Building collisions. Now, Doug mentioned about lights and how you should turn them off at night because of how it affects the insect population. But something like 4.8 billion birds migrate south in the spring. About 4 billion fly further south from the U.S. down to Central America in the spring. And most of that is done at night. And they're flying into buildings. And for some reason, they're attracted to the buildings that are lit up. So there is a problem with that sort of collision. Also, automobiles, you'll run into the birds, and that's about 200,000 or so, or 200 million, I'm sorry. And just over 1 million are killed by windmills. We talk a lot about the windmills, but there's thought that we may be able to solve that one by just painting one of the turbines or whatever, or the wings black. Why it works, no one knows. Pesticides now, those kill about 67 million birds per year in the U.S. And that is something that there are some positive signs. Just in last December, Governor Hochul finally signed the Birds and Bees Protection Act, and that was largely due to the ground roots efforts of groups like the Audubon Society, and there was one person that I serve on the board with, Kara Mason, who was very instrumental in getting the restriction on neonicotinoids, along with the NRDC, to get those reduced. With those, they're usually put on like corn seed or soybean seed, those kind of things, to prevent pests from eating. But if a sparrow eats just one seed, it can kill the sparrow. So now finally that's being taken care of. But the big problem that we're more involved with as a group here is feeding the birds. That's a problem, getting the food. About 96% of terrestrial birds, not including the wetland birds, but that only brings it down to like 92%, eat insects for part of their life, if not all of their life. And that part is mainly in the spring. They'll also eat seeds and fruits, but when do the seeds and fruits come? They come later in the season, and if they're having nestlings, there are no seeds and fruits to feed them. So they're feeding them insects. And when we talk about insects, you could feed them 6,000 ticks or whatever, and that would not equal one big fat caterpillar. So it's the Lepidoptera species that we're really trying to encourage that growth, because you have this big, soft, easily edible, easily transportable from where you find it back to the nest to feed the fledglings. You want more of the caterpillars. Part of the problem is that they're in decline too. As much as we have 39% fewer birds, we have 40% fewer insects. It's a very simple calculation that if they don't have food, they're going to die. No insects, no birds. So we want to save the insects. That's really what it's all about. I say we work at, or one of the things that I do is the native gardens at the Sawmill River Audubon. And I tell all of the volunteers, we're not gardeners, we're short order chefs at a 24-hour diner. That's what we're doing. We're feeding these things. And people look at a plant and they say, oh, look, the leaves are all eaten. That's great. That's fantastic, you know. So that's exactly the kind of look you want in your garden, something that has been completely decimated by caterpillars. And somehow they tend to know just the right amount. Like I was seeding some parsley, which takes forever to germinate and then grow, and then there were caterpillars all over it. Oh no, they got my parsley. But then I was thinking, I can get parsley down at the shop, right? You know, they need this stuff. And they stopped at just the point that, you know, they got what they needed when they needed it, and then the rest of the parsley just grew up fine. So it was wonderful. But in terms of feeding those insects, we have found, as I'm sure you've heard today, that's what nutrients, or the natives, which are filled with nutrients, are great at. They're really feeding all of these insects, whereas introduced plants are not necessarily feeding them as much. So then the question becomes, what is native? And 30 years ago or so, when I was designing some gardens, people would say, well, Mahonia, that's from Oregon, that's native, and oak leaf hydrangea, that comes from Georgia, that's native. But, oh, and if something's from Quebec, that's not native. You know, so it was more of a geopolitical thing. And then there was the thought by a guy, Richard Dark, who wrote a lot of grass books, that if something wasn't natively growing within 100 feet of where you're going to reintroduce it, it's not native. And what he meant by that is if you've got something on top of a bald mountain in Croton like we have, and you took that and you planted it right down at the water line where there's plenty of moisture, plenty of sunlight, air circulation, you may have a mess on your hands. So what is native, you have to think about that, but also be a little loose about that, because I think you're really looking instead of what is nutritive. And again, that's not saying that natives aren't the best thing when it comes to nutrients. I was doing, or you mentioned the Rockefeller butterfly garden. I redid this big area, and I had done a lot of butterfly gardens and bird and butterfly gardens and hummingbird and butterfly gardens, those kind of things. So I kind of had my cheat sheet, my list of what would work and what wouldn't. And I used that. It's like a palette you then design something with. And it was all going through the Xerxes Society, the Butterfly Society in Manhattan. And it was saying, okay, that's good. But this Monarda fistulosa, this wild bergamot, that's native to the Bronx, not Manhattan. And I thought, oh, gee, talking about like 300 years ago, and it's across the East River. Can't you? And I said, well, you probably want me to eliminate all of the buddleia then, because that's a butterfly bush, because that's from Southeast Asia. And they said, oh, no, butterflies love that. Keep it in. So I guess one thing from that, now I can understand why they kept in the buddleia, because butterflies do love it, but you can make the argument that it supplies all of the nutrients that butterflies need, but not in the amount that they need it, and that's the real problem. Some say it's invasive. I've never seen it invasive except once at St. John the Divine, which was another thing of ours, or another account. There was a buddleia on top of a 4-story building in the slate roof that somehow got up there, and I thought, well, it's not my responsibility, really. I'm not going to deal with that. But non-natives can still be good for pollinators, and that's something to keep in mind. Things like butterfly bush, catmint, mints in general are really good, and a lot of those are introduced from Central Europe or Southern Europe as well. Lavender, well, that's a mint. Sedum, Russian sage. A lot of perennials that we use as annuals, like lantana, which comes from Central America, zinnia, which comes from Central America, pentas, daisies are Asian, alyssum. All of those things are really great for pollinators. And in our native gardens, we're very strict about, is this native to northern Westchester? Would this have been there? And they all are. But the annuals that we supplement them with are a lot of these Central American things, like the lantana, like the zinnia or whatever. One thing to consider as gardeners is that if you're going to plant a zinnia or any plant, don't go for the doubles, because doubles make it, and doubles are like what a carnation would be like, or a rose, that kind of thing. Go for the singles, which is what like a daisy would look like, just single petals, because that allows then the pollinators to get into the real florets, which are right in the center there, and just go from floret to floret to floret, and get a lot of food quickly that way. Also, I don't think the point was made today. A lot of this is just repetition of what's been said before, but we think of natives versus invasives, and that's not fair. That's like U.S. citizens versus banditos. It's not that. It's U.S. citizens or natives versus introduced. And a native plant can grow wild and can blot out any of the other plants as well and just cause havoc. And that's called aggressive. The exact same habit, the exact same thing in an introduced plant is called introduced. So that's what the comparison is. There's natives, introduced, aggressive, and invasive. But non-natives can have some interesting effects outside of what we can put easily together. If you don't have food, don't have nutrients that they're not going to eat or whatever. Some of the Asian honeysuckles, the Lonoceras, like Lonicera tartaricus and Lonicera morii, are very popular with cedar waxwings and the yellow-shafted northern flickers, which are the ones we have on this side of the Mississippi River. And it was found that these berries, which they love, and being a fruit and a berry, they eat it and then they spread it, they poop it elsewhere, and it grows and grows and grows, was turning their shafts pink, or the extensions of their tail feathers pink. And so in mating, a female is looking for a male with a really great yellow tail feather, and they're just seeing males with pink tail feathers and saying, no thanks, I'm not interested. And so in that sense, the bird population is going down because it's affecting reproduction. In a similar but opposite way, the amur honeysuckle, which is very common, the AMUR honeysuckle, is very popular with cardinals, and that makes their plumage really red. And so the healthy cardinals look really red. But so do the sickly cardinals. They look really healthy and wonderful. So then the females will mate with those should be sickly and don't keep them in the gene pool. And that's bringing down the population as well. So there can be several unexpected effects of non-natives in the landscape. As I mentioned, more than a third of the population is migratory. Some of them are flying halfway around the globe to find ample supplies of seeds and insects. The number of bird species in the Hudson River increases by 300% in the spring. So we have a lot of new people coming in. Neotropical migrants like scarlet tanagers, Baltimore orioles, the same birds that I see in my backyard. We went down to Trinidad and went down to Costa Rica, and they were there in the winter, and like old friends. But they come back, and they're very, very hungry, as you can imagine. Or in the fall, when they're leaving and going back, they have to take this long migration, and it really expends a lot of energy. And what we found also is that native trees, which to bulk up for that, they're mostly eating nuts and berries and seeds or fruits. And the native species have much higher lipids and fats as well as proteins as opposed to non-native species or introduced species, which tend to be higher in carbohydrates. So that's something to consider. Also, where it's happening tends to not be consistent. Much of it, as I mentioned about the deer, has to do with loss of habitat. Forests alone have lost about 1 billion birds so far. Grassland bird populations collectively have declined about 53%, largely because of agriculture, or another 720 million birds. Water birds and ducks in the U.S. have increased by 18% and 34%, respectively. So they're on the rise. And that's a good sign, I think. And the reason I think it's a good sign, well, some of what can explain that is their diet is not exclusively insects. They're also eating tadpoles and small fish and mollusks, things like that. But also, I think that there's been a lot of attention to saving our wetlands, saving our watersheds, saving our riparian areas. We're very focused about that, very concerned about cleaning things up, and if you're going to go clean up, where do you go clean up? Along a riverbank. Everyone is doing that. And so we're really getting the wetland areas cleaner, and what are we seeing? The bird populations are going up. So that means if we can do some of these things in some of these areas, if we can do things as simple as put a bell on a bird, on a cat's neck, we can really make some change, some great change. I guess I was thinking, you know, we could have saved everyone a lot of time if we just said two things. Welcome everyone, plant an oak tree, put a bell on your cat, goodbye everyone. And so, remember, if there's just a few things, remember that 2.4 billion birds out of 2.9 are from cats. So keep your cats inside or put a bell on them. Plant natives if you can. Let them be eaten. Don't use pesticides ever. Never, ever. And in terms of nutrients, for what we're growing, you're not growing soybean crops or anything like that. you don't need to be adding fertilizer. The fertilizer comes from the plants themselves. Fertilizer is brought in from the nitrogen coming in. And lastly, tell others, tell people about this, and that will help save the world.
Mark, thank you. That was fascinating, especially for us bird lovers. That was absolutely amazing. I don't know, Suzanne, do we have still time for any questions or? Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. Can we have a round of applause for our panel? It was really excellent, all of you. Fantastic.
If you have any questions for any of the individual panelists, maybe they'll stay a little longer and they can answer them directly. Thanks again.